How does a man get fired after 20 years by a CEO's grandson, who's only been in charge for 2 weeks, and walk out without saying a word? What happens when that silence turns into something the board, the market, and the family name can't undo? This is how one careless morning set off a chain reaction no one saw coming. Before we go any further, take a second to subscribe, hit the hype button, and like the video. It really helps the channel grow. And tell us in the comments, what would you do in this situation? The fluorescent lights in the open-plan office hummed the same tune they'd been humming for 2 decades. I sat at my desk, third row from the windows, surrounded by monitors displaying production metrics I'd designed back when this company still made gadgets people actually wanted to buy. The screen showed green indicators across every manufacturing line. Smooth, efficient, predictable. That was the problem, apparently. Predictable didn't photograph well for quarterly earnings calls. Drake, you still using that ancient spreadsheet system? Evan Calder stood behind me, close enough that I could smell his designer cologne. 26 years old, 2 weeks into his role as chief operating officer, and already treating the building like his personal kingdom. His grandfather Martin founded this company in a garage 50 years ago. That family connection bought Evan a corner office and a title that should have required at least a decade of experience. It tracks efficiency better than the new dashboard, I said, keeping my eyes on the screen. Right, but it looks terrible in presentations. He laughed, that entitled chuckle that came so naturally to people who'd never actually built anything. We need modern visuals. The board expects polish. I'd sat through 3 board meetings in the past month where Evan presented my data as his own insights. Each time, he'd stumbled through the technical questions, then deflected with buzzwords about digital transformation and synergistic optimization. The board members nodded along, charmed by his confidence, oblivious to the fact that he couldn't explain how a single production line actually functioned. I'll look into updating the format, I lied. He clapped my shoulder like we were teammates. That's the spirit. Oh, and there's a meeting at 10, conference room B. Be there. No agenda, no calendar invite. Just a command delivered with the assumption of obedience. I watched him stride away, stopping at Monica's desk to compliment her earrings with the same performative charm he used on everything. The younger staff ate it up. Fresh energy, they called it. A new direction. I'd trained half of them when they started as interns, walked them through equipment failures and supplier negotiations, taught them how to read between the lines when vendors made promises they couldn't keep. Now they looked at me like I was office furniture. Reliable, functional, easily replaced. The morning crawled by. I reviewed production schedules, approved vendor invoices, and responded to 3 separate emails from suppliers asking why their usual contact person, me, wasn't copied on recent communications. Evan had started routing everything through his assistant, a recent business school graduate who thought bandwidth meant internet speed. At 9:58, I stood and walked toward conference room B. The hallway felt longer than usual, or maybe I was just walking slower. 20 years of muscle memory told me exactly which floorboards creaked, which doors stuck in their frames, which coffee makers in the break room actually worked. The conference room door was already closed. Through the frosted glass, I could see shapes moving inside. I knocked twice and entered. Evan sat at the head of the table, fingers steepled like he'd practiced in front of a mirror. Lena Brooks from HR occupied the chair to his right, her expression professionally neutral. She met my eyes for half a second, then looked down at her tablet. Drake, have a seat. Evan gestured to the chair directly across from him. I sat. The leather squeaked under my weight, loud in the sudden silence. So, Evan began, leaning back with theatrical casualness, I've been reviewing departmental structures, looking at where we can streamline operations for maximum efficiency. I said nothing. Lena's fingers moved across her tablet screen, taking notes she'd probably been instructed to take. The reality is, Evan continued, warming to his script, we're moving into a new era. Consumer electronics, smart home integration, IoT connectivity. These require different skill sets, fresh perspectives. The industry's evolving faster than ever, and we need people who can evolve with it. Still, I remained silent. I'd heard versions of this speech before, delivered to other long-term employees who'd suddenly become cultural fit challenges when new management wanted to make room for their own recruits. Your contributions over the years have been, he paused, searching for the word, appreciated. But the truth is, Drake, you represent legacy infrastructure. The systems you built were fine for their time, but we're building something different now, something modern. Legacy infrastructure. The phrase landed like a slap, but I kept my face blank. Effective immediately, we're going to have to let you go. Evan delivered the line with practiced regret that didn't reach his eyes. Lena will handle the exit logistics. I'm sure you understand this is just business, nothing personal. 20 years, 240 months of overtime, countless weekends spent troubleshooting production crises while executives played golf, holidays sacrificed because a supplier shipment went sideways and only I knew which alternative vendors could fill the gap. Training sessions conducted for people who now earned twice my salary. All of it reduced to 6 words. We're going to let you go. I stood slowly, pushing the chair back without a sound. Drake? Evan's voice carried a note of uncertainty, maybe expecting anger or pleading. I looked at him. Really looked. Saw the expensive haircut, the tailored suit that cost more than I made in a week, the Rolex inherited from his grandfather. Saw the complete absence of understanding about what actually kept this company running. Okay, I said. That was it. 1 word. I turned and walked out, leaving Lena staring at her tablet and Evan frowning at the anticlimactic ending to his power play. My desk waited exactly as I'd left it, monitors still glowing with green indicators. I pulled my jacket from the back of my chair, unplugged my personal phone charger, and grabbed the coffee mug my daughter made in 3rd grade. She was 19 now, finishing sophomore year at college. Nobody looked up as I walked toward the elevator. The office continued its usual rhythm, keyboards clicking, phones ringing, someone laughing at a video playing too loud on their computer. The elevator arrived empty. I stepped inside and pressed the button for the ground floor. As the doors began to close, my phone vibrated in my pocket. I pulled it out and saw the calendar reminder I'd set 3 months ago. Annual supplier review, confirm attendance. The meeting was scheduled for next Tuesday. Evan had no idea it existed. The elevator descended and something shifted in my chest. Not anger, not even hurt. Just a cold, clear understanding that people who mistake silence for weakness tend to learn expensive lessons. The parking garage smelled like oil and exhaust. I sat in my truck, hands on the steering wheel, not turning the key. My phone kept buzzing with notifications, automated emails, system alerts, probably a few confused messages from people who'd heard I was gone. I ignored them all and drove home. The house was quiet when I arrived. Janet wouldn't be back from her shift at the hospital until 6. I dropped my jacket on the kitchen chair and stood in the middle of our living room, feeling unmoored. This was supposed to be a work day. I should have been reviewing production schedules, not standing in my own house at 10:47 on a Tuesday morning. My home office occupied the spare bedroom we'd converted after our daughter left for college. I sat at the desk and opened my laptop. The desktop background showed a photo from last summer, Janet and me at the lake, squinting into the sunset. I opened a browser and started typing. First, my employee portal login, still active. They hadn't locked me out yet. I downloaded my complete personnel file. Performance reviews, training certifications, project completion records, 20 years of documentation, all rated exceeds expectations or higher. Next, I pulled up my email archive. Thousands of messages, meticulously organized into folders I'd created over the years. Vendor agreements, production schedules, crisis management threads, technical specifications. I'd been the institutional memory for every major project since 2008. I backed it all up to an external drive. The rational part of my brain said this was just prudent record-keeping. The rest of me knew better. I was mapping territory, taking inventory of exactly what Evan thought he could operate without. My phone rang. Janet's name appeared on the screen. "Hey," I answered. "Are you home?" Her voice carried that careful tone she used when she already knew something was wrong. "Melissa from HR just called me. Said she wanted to express her condolences about your employment situation." "Drake, what happened?" I told her. The whole thing took less than 3 minutes. Silence stretched across the line. Then, 20 years. Yeah. And that little punk just... She stopped herself. Janet rarely swore, even when the situation deserved it. "What are you going to do?" "I don't know yet." "Bull." She knew me too well. "You're already planning something. I can hear it in your voice." "I'm just getting my files organized." "Right, and I'm just a nurse who happens to know exactly how someone looks when they are calculating their next move." A pause. "Don't do anything stupid." "I won't. Don't do anything illegal either." "Janet, I'm serious. That family has lawyers, lots of them." "I know." Another pause, longer this time. "But if you're going to do something smart and perfectly legal that happens to make that arrogant grandson regret his choices, well, I suppose I'll support my husband's professional decisions." I smiled despite myself. "I'll see you at dinner." After we hung up, I sat back in my chair and thought about the past 20 years. Really thought about them, not just the highlight reel I usually played in my head. I'd started at the company when it was still small enough that everyone knew everyone. Martin Calder ran operations personally back then, walking the production floor every morning, learning every employee's name. I was 32, fresh from a failed startup, hungry to prove myself. The work was technical, demanding, and I was good at it. Within 3 years, I'd redesigned the entire supply chain workflow. Production efficiency jumped by 40%. Martin promoted me to senior operations engineer and gave me autonomy to build the systems I thought we needed. I built them well, maybe too well. They ran so smoothly that people forgot they needed maintenance, oversight, someone who understood the architecture. The company grew. Martin stepped back from daily operations. Professional managers arrived with MBAs and strategies. I kept the machines running while they made presentations. Then came the promotions I didn't get. Positions I'd earned going to outsiders with better networking skills. Projects I'd initiated being reassigned to teams who'd take the credit. My calm demeanor and my preference for solving problems quietly rather than making noise about my contributions, all of it mistaken for contentment with my station. They thought I lacked ambition. Really, I just lacked interest in playing political games. But politics happened whether you played or not, and people who didn't play sometimes got played. I opened my file directory and created a new folder, titled it Continuity. The next few hours disappeared into research. I reviewed every major vendor contract, cross-referencing them with the contact database I'd maintained personally. Pulled up technical specifications for equipment that only I knew how to service. Found email chains where I'd personally guaranteed performance metrics to suppliers. Around 4 in the afternoon, my phone buzzed with a new voicemail. I played it on speaker. Mr. Torin, this is Lena Brooks from HR. I'm calling to schedule a routine exit interview just to finalize some paperwork. When you have a chance, could you call me back? Thanks. Routine. Finalize. Careful neutral language that probably meant they'd realized the firing happened too fast, skipped too many procedures. I saved the voicemail and didn't call back. Instead, I pulled up my calendar and started going through every meeting, every commitment, every scheduled check-in I'd planned for the next 6 weeks. The annual supplier review next Tuesday, the quarterly equipment maintenance assessment, the production line upgrade consultation with our Japanese parts manufacturer, all of it still scheduled, all of it still listing me as the primary contact. Evan had fired me without understanding what I actually did. He'd pulled a thread without checking what it was attached to. I leaned back and closed my eyes, thinking through the cascading implications. The suppliers who'd built relationships with me personally, not the company. The technical knowledge that existed in my head, not the documentation. The industry contacts who knew my name, not the company's. 20 years of quiet competence, about to become very loud absence. My phone buzzed again. A text from Samuel Hargrave, our longest-standing supplier liaison. Heard you're out. What's the story? Word traveled fast in this industry. I typed back, new management, fresh direction. His response came immediately. Their loss. Let me know if you land somewhere. I'd rather work with you than them. I stared at that message for a long moment, then saved it in a new folder labeled Receipts. The next morning, I drove to headquarters not because I wanted to, but because Lena had called again, this time with a slightly more urgent tone. We really need to complete your exit documentation, Drake. There are some formalities we missed. Formalities. That was one way to describe it. The HR department occupied the 3rd floor, tucked behind frosted glass doors that always made me think of a doctor's office. Lena waited in her private office, door open, expression professionally composed. Thanks for coming in, she said, gesturing to the chair across from her desk. I know this is awkward. Is it? She almost smiled. For me? Yes. I wasn't consulted before the decision was made. That's irregular. I sat and waited. Lena was careful, methodical. She wouldn't have called me in just to apologize. Your termination should have gone through several approval layers, she continued, pulling up something on her computer screen. Employment contracts for senior staff require HR sign-off, departmental review, and in some cases, board notification, especially after 20 years of service. But it didn't? No. Evan issued the termination directly. I wasn't informed until after you'd left the building. She turned the monitor so I could see the screen. It showed my personnel file, flagged with several red warnings. According to policy, this dismissal violated at least 3 procedural requirements. So what happens now? That depends. Lena studied me carefully. We can process this as a standard termination with the usual severance package, or we can acknowledge the procedural errors and negotiate a more comprehensive exit arrangement. Translation? They'd screwed up, and she wanted to know if I planned to make noise about it. What does Evan think should happen? Evan doesn't know I'm having this conversation. She closed the laptop. He's busy preparing for a board presentation next week. That's something about modernization initiatives and operational restructuring. Of course he was. Probably planning to take credit for improvements that hadn't happened yet, built on systems he didn't understand. I'll think about it, I said. Take your time, within reason. She handed me a folder. These are the standard exit documents. Look them over. We can schedule a follow-up next week if needed. I took the folder and left, but instead of going home, I drove to a coffee shop 3 blocks from headquarters, the kind of place where industry people grabbed lunch, had informal meetings, traded gossip over espresso. I ordered black coffee and sat near the window. 20 minutes later, Phil Vanguard walked in. I texted him on the drive over. Coffee? Need to pick your brain about something. Phil had worked vendor relations at a competing firm for 15 years. We'd crossed paths at conferences, shared war stories about difficult suppliers, maintained the kind of professional friendship that existed primarily through email. Drake. He spotted me and headed over, coffee already in hand. Heard you got shown the door. That true? As of yesterday. Wow. He sat down heavily. 20 years? Give or take. What did you do? Insult the CEO's mother? His grandson, actually, existed while being over 50. Phil laughed, but it was bitter. Yeah, I know that playbook. New leadership comes in, wants to make their mark, clears out anyone who remembers how things used to work, makes them feel powerful. Seems that way. So what's next for you? I sipped my coffee, choosing words carefully. Depends. What's the market like right now for someone with my background? You serious? Phil leaned forward. Drake, you built one of the most efficient operation systems in the industry. People talk about your supply chain work at conferences. If you're actually available, 6 companies would interview you tomorrow. 6 seems optimistic. I'm understating. He pulled out his phone. You know Irene Whitlock? Name sounds familiar. Senior recruiter at ArcLight Industries. They've been trying to poach mid-level talent from your company for months. If I told her Drake Torin was available, she'd have an offer on your desk by Friday. Something cold settled in my chest. Not excitement, exactly. More like pieces sliding into place. Let me get my resume updated first, I said. Don't bother. I'll send her your LinkedIn and tell her to call you. He was already typing. Trust me, this is the easiest placement I'll make all year. We talked for another 20 minutes. Industry gossip, mutual acquaintances, the usual small talk that built professional networks. When we parted ways, Phil clasped my shoulder and said, Seriously, man, this might be the best thing that could have happened to you. Sometimes you need to get pushed out to realize you are undervalued. I drove home thinking about that phrase. Undervalued. It implied the value had always been there, just unrecognized. But value without recognition was just potential, and potential didn't pay mortgages. My phone rang as I pulled into the driveway. Unknown number. This is Drake. Mr. Torin, my name is Irene Whitlock. Phil Vanguard suggested I give you a call. Do you have a few minutes? I sat in the truck, engine off, and talked to Irene for 45 minutes. She asked intelligent questions about production methodology, supplier relations, crisis management protocols, questions that demonstrated she'd actually researched my work history, not just skimmed a resume. We've been looking for someone to lead operations integration for our new manufacturing division, she said. Based on this conversation, I think you'd be a strong fit. Would you be interested in coming in for a formal interview? I might be. Excellent. How's Thursday morning? Say 10 o'clock? That works? Perfect. I'll send you the address and some background materials. Drake, or can I call you Drake? Sure. I've heard good things about your work for years. I'm genuinely excited about this conversation. We hung up, and I sat in my truck, staring at my phone. 24 hours ago, I'd been fired. Now I had an interview with a competitor, a supplier promising loyalty, and an HR manager admitting procedural violations. Evan probably thought I was home feeling sorry for myself. I opened my email and started a new draft to my personal address. No subject line. Just a list of every vendor contract that included specific language about technical continuity, every supplier agreement that named me personally as the liaison, every piece of institutional knowledge that existed in my head instead of company documentation. Then I saved it without sending and went inside. Janet was in the kitchen, chopping vegetables for dinner. You look focused, she observed. Interview Thursday with ArcLight. Her knife paused mid-cut. That was fast. Industry's smaller than people think. And, she turned to face me, are you going to take it if they offer? Don't know yet. Depends on the offer. And on what else you're planning. I didn't answer, just opened the refrigerator and grabbed a beer I didn't really want. Drake. Janet's voice carried that particular firmness she reserved for when I was being deliberately obtuse. What are you planning? Nothing illegal. That's not reassuring. It's not supposed to be. I met her eyes. They made a mistake. A big one. I'm just documenting it. She studied me for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Okay, but promise me something. What? When this is over, whatever happens, you walk away clean. No regrets, no guilt, no looking back. Deal? Deal. She went back to chopping vegetables, and I went to my office to update the folder labeled Continuity. Thursday morning arrived cold and clear. I sat in my truck for a moment before starting the engine, watching my breath fog the windshield. The charcoal suit Janet had bought me for our daughter's high school graduation hung perfectly. She'd insisted I get it tailored, said a man my age deserved clothes that actually fit. The tie wasn't too flashy, but wasn't forgettable either. Professional, experienced, exactly what ArcLight Industries would be looking for. The drive to their headquarters took 40 minutes through morning traffic. I used the time to review what I knew about the company. Mid-sized competitor, aggressive growth strategy, reputation for poaching talent. They'd tried to recruit from my former employer twice in the past year, both times unsuccessfully. Now they wouldn't have to poach. I was walking in voluntarily. The lobby was all glass and steel, modern in a way that felt almost aggressive. A receptionist directed me to the 8th floor, where Irene Whitlock waited with a smile that seemed genuinely pleased to see me. Drake, welcome. Thanks for coming in on short notice. Happy to be here. Coffee? Water? Coffee would be great. Black. She led me through an open floor plan that reminded me of my old office, except everything here looked newer, shinier. People worked with an intensity that felt deliberate, performative, trying to prove something to someone. The conference room had windows overlooking the city. Irene handed me the coffee and gestured to a seat. I'm going to be direct with you, she said. We've been watching your company's operations for years. Specifically, we've been watching you. The efficiency metrics, the supplier relationships, the way you handled that recall situation 3 years ago. Industry people notice that kind of competence. I appreciate that. So when Phil told me you were available, I'll admit I had to confirm it twice. Seemed too good to be true. She opened a folder. Walk me through your approach to supply chain integration. Not the theory, the actual methodology you use. For the next hour, I answered questions that demonstrated real understanding. She asked about crisis management protocols, how I balanced cost efficiency with reliability, my philosophy on vendor relationships. These weren't HR screening questions. These were the questions someone asked when they actually understood the work. Around 11, she introduced me to James Chen, their VP of Operations. He was younger than me by a decade, sharp-eyed and clearly skeptical. Drake, Irene speaks highly of you. But I have to ask, 20 years at one company, then suddenly you're available. What happened? I could have softened it, made it diplomatic. Instead, I told the truth. New leadership decided experience was less valuable than appearing modern. They were wrong, but by the time they realize it, I'll be working somewhere that values competence over image. James smiled. Fair enough. Let me show you a problem we're having. He pulled up production data on a large monitor. I saw the issue immediately. Their component sourcing was diversified but not optimized. They had redundancy where they needed efficiency and single-source dependencies where they needed backup options. You're spending about 18% more than necessary on raw materials, I said. And you've got vulnerability here, here, and here. I pointed to 3 supplier relationships. Any one of those fails, you've got production delays of at least 2 weeks. That's exactly right, James said quietly. How fast did you see that? About 15 seconds. It's pattern recognition. You do this long enough, inefficiency has a signature. He looked at Irene. I'm convinced. The next hour involved meeting with 2 more department heads, both of whom seemed equally impressed and slightly intimidated. I didn't try to show off, just answered their questions with the same straightforward competence I'd been demonstrating for 20 years. The difference was that here, people seemed to actually appreciate it. By noon, Irene was walking me back to the lobby with a handshake that lingered just long enough to signal intent. We'll be in touch by end of week, she said. But between us, start thinking about what compensation package would make this worth your while. We want you here, Drake. Be thinking about what that's worth to you. I drove away from ArcLight's headquarters knowing I'd nailed it. The question was whether I actually wanted the job or just wanted the leverage. Both, maybe. The distinction seemed less important than it had a week ago. My phone buzzed as I merged onto the highway. Another text from Samuel Hargreave. Got a minute? Need to ask you something about the spring contracts. I pulled into a rest stop and called him back. Drake, hey. Samuel's voice carried that specific tension people get when they're trying to sound casual about something serious. Quick question. Our contract renewal is coming up next month, and I just got an email from some kid named Preston asking for technical specifications on the component lineup. Our problem is, half of what he's asking for doesn't match what we actually supply. Preston's Evan's assistant. Yeah, I figured. Look, no offense to the kid, but he clearly doesn't understand our product line. The specs he's requesting would require retooling our entire production setup. We're talking 6 months of downtime and probably $2 million in equipment costs. Is this some kind of new direction thing, or is he just confused? I let the silence sit for a moment. Probably confused. Preston's been with the company 5 months. He's smart, but he doesn't have the technical background. Right. So here's my problem. I can't retool based on confused specifications, and I can't ignore a contract request from the client. So who should I actually be talking to? Because I've been working with you for, 8 years now? And suddenly I'm getting forwarded to people who don't know the difference between compression fittings and expansion joints. 8 years. I'd negotiated Samuel's initial contract personally, walked him through the product requirements, helped him understand exactly what we needed and why. When his original supplier failed 2 years in, I'd found him an alternative source within 48 hours, preventing a production shutdown that would have cost both companies serious money. When the recall happened, a batch of defective housing units that could have destroyed his reputation, I'd worked with him directly to identify the problem, isolate the affected inventory, and implement new quality controls. We'd built trust the old-fashioned way, through competence, reliability, and mutual respect. I'm not with the company anymore, I said. The silence stretched longer than I expected. Then, since when? Tuesday. They fired you. His voice rose. After everything you've done for them? After building their entire operational infrastructure from scratch? New management. Fresh perspectives. You know how it goes. No, I don't know how it goes. This is insane. You're the only person there who actually knows what we do, how we work, why certain specifications matter. How are they planning to manage the technical side of our relationship? I don't think they've thought that far ahead. Another pause, longer this time. I could almost hear him thinking through the implications. Are you landing somewhere else? Probably. Had an interview this morning, actually. Where? Can't say yet, but it's in the industry. When you do land, call me, please. Because honestly, Drake, I'd rather pull our contract and follow you than try to explain basic engineering principles to a 23-year-old business major who thinks Excel formulas are the same as understanding manufacturing processes. I didn't say anything to that. Didn't need to. I'm serious, Samuel continued. Our contract has a technical continuity clause. You know that, right? It specifies that major changes in technical liaison require mutual agreement. If they've removed you without establishing a qualified replacement, we've got grounds to request contract review. I'm aware of the clause. And I'm documenting everything, just in case. He laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. They have no idea what they've done, do they? Not yet. We talked for a few more minutes about industry gossip, mutual acquaintances, the usual relationship maintenance. When we hung up, I sat in my truck and stared at the traffic flowing past on the highway. One supplier expressing concern could be dismissed as personal loyalty. But I knew Samuel wouldn't be the only one calling. Over the next 3 days, similar conversations unfolded with mathematical precision. Rebecca Chen from Advanced Polymers called Wednesday afternoon, frustrated by contradictory material specifications. Thomas Wright from Precision Components reached out Thursday morning, confused about delivery schedules that made no logistical sense. Marcus Rodriguez. No, I'd been told to avoid that name. Michael Reeves from Integrated Systems called Friday, politely asking if I could clarify some technical requirements because the new contact person seemed uncertain about the basics. Each conversation followed the same pattern: confusion about communication breakdowns, frustration with unqualified replacements, thinly veiled questions about my future plans. I listened, acknowledged their concerns, and mentioned I'd keep them updated. Nothing illegal, nothing even unethical. Just honest conversations with professional contacts who valued competence. I didn't encourage any of it. Didn't need to. The situation was encouraging itself. Friday afternoon, Irene called back with an offer that made me set down the coffee I'd been drinking. Senior Director of Operations Integration, she said. Base salary is $140,000. That's 20% higher than your previous position. Full benefits package, stock options vesting over 4 years, and a signing bonus of $25,000. I wrote the numbers down, even though I'd remember them perfectly. That's a serious offer. We're serious about bringing you on board. The team's excited. James hasn't stopped talking about your supply chain analysis. When can you start? I need a few days to think it over. Of course. Take the time you need. But Drake, we're not the only company who knows your value. If you're on the market, others will come calling. I'd like to have your answer before that happens. When I told Janet the numbers that evening, she actually whistled, low and impressed. That's $40,000 more than you were making, she said. Plus the signing bonus. Plus the signing bonus. She looked at me carefully. But you haven't accepted yet. No. Because? I looked at the offer letter on my laptop screen, then at the folder labeled Continuity sitting prominently in my downloads. Timing. You're waiting for something specific. Maybe, she shook her head, but I caught the smile she was trying to hide. You're enjoying this. I'm not enjoying anything. I'm just being thorough, making sure I understand all the variables before committing. Right. And I'm sure it has nothing to do with the fact that Evan's big board presentation is next week. I'd almost forgotten about that. Almost. The quarterly board meeting where he was supposed to unveil his modernization strategy, prove his leadership capability, justify the changes he'd implemented, including my termination. That's Wednesday, I said. And you're planning to have an answer for ArcLight by when? Friday, maybe Thursday. After the board meeting. Coincidentally. She laughed and kissed my forehead. Just promise me you'll walk away clean when this is done. No regrets, no second-guessing yourself. Promise. The weekend passed slowly. I reviewed vendor contracts, updated my documentation, and tried not to think too hard about what Wednesday might bring. Monday morning, I received an email from Lena Brooks that made everything suddenly real. Subject line, Exit documentation, urgent. The message was brief and precisely worded. Drake, we still haven't finalized your severance paperwork. Company policy requires board approval for terminations at your level, and the matter is scheduled to be addressed at Wednesday's quarterly review. Your attendance is requested but not required. Please let me know if you plan to participate. I read it 3 times, parsing the careful language. Your attendance is requested but not required. Translation. Lena wanted me there but couldn't officially mandate it. She was giving me an opening, maybe even an invitation. I replied, I'll be there. Her response came within 5 minutes. Thank you. Meeting begins at 2 p.m., executive boardroom. Monday afternoon, I called Irene. I'm very interested in the position, I said, but I need a few more days to consider. Would that be acceptable? Of course. Take the time you need. We're not going anywhere, and neither is the offer. One more thing. If I accept, when would the start date be? We're flexible. 2 weeks' notice is standard, but given your situation, already separated from your previous employer, we could start you immediately if you preferred. Monday would work, or we could push it to the following week if you need transition time. And the offer would be in writing? Absolutely. I can have the formal contract to you by tomorrow if that helps your decision-making process. That would be perfect. I'll have an answer for you by Friday at the latest. I hung up and opened my calendar. The board meeting loomed on Wednesday at 2 p.m. My name was still listed in the attendance roster. An administrative oversight nobody had bothered to correct, or maybe something Lena had deliberately left unchanged. Either way, I'd be there. Tuesday evening, I laid out my suit, checked that my shoes were polished, and went to bed early. Sleep didn't come easy. I kept running through scenarios, possible questions, likely responses. By 3 a.m., I gave up and went to my office, reviewing everything one more time. Vendor contracts with technical continuity clauses, supplier agreements listing me by name as the designated technical liaison, email threads proving I'd personally guaranteed performance metrics to partners who'd built their own processes around my specifications, HR documentation showing the procedural violations in my termination, all of it legal, all of it factual, all of it about to become very relevant. Wednesday morning, I woke at 5 a.m. from a sleep that had been more restless shifting than actual rest. No point lying there staring at the ceiling, so I got up, made coffee strong enough to strip paint, and sat at the kitchen table watching dawn creep across the backyard. Janet found me there an hour later, still in my bathrobe, hands wrapped around a mug that had gone cold. Couldn't sleep? She asked. Slept enough? Liar. She poured herself coffee and sat across from me. You're nervous. I'm prepared. That's different from nervous. You're both. She reached across and squeezed my hand. It's okay to admit this matters to you. I looked at her. Really looked. We'd been married 26 years. She knew me better than I knew myself sometimes. Knew when I was pretending calm, when I was actually calm, and when I was using calm as a weapon. It does matter, I admitted. More than it probably should. Why shouldn't it matter? They disrespected you. Threw away 20 years like it meant nothing. You're allowed to care about that. Caring about it and doing something about it are different things. And you're doing something about it. I'm just showing up to a meeting, answering questions honestly. She smiled. Right. And the fact that your honest answers are going to cause problems for people who deserve problems, that's just a happy coincidence. Basically. I'm proud of you, she said quietly. Not because you're getting revenge, because you're standing up for yourself without compromising who you are. That takes discipline. I squeezed her hand back, then stood and headed for the shower. By 1:30, I was dressed in the same charcoal suit I'd worn to the ArcLight interview, driving toward headquarters with my hand steady on the wheel and my mind running through the likely sequence of events. The board meeting would start with formalities, minutes, financial reports, standard procedural business. My termination would probably come up third or fourth on the agenda, presented as a minor personnel matter already resolved. Evan would be confident. He'd prepared a presentation, practiced his talking points, probably rehearsed in front of a mirror. He thought he was walking into a routine review where he'd demonstrate leadership decisiveness. He had no idea what was waiting. I arrived at headquarters at 1:45, parked in a visitor spot since my access card had been deactivated, and walked through the lobby like I belonged there. The security guard at the desk looked up, did a double take, then decided it wasn't his problem and went back to his phone. The elevator ride to the executive floor felt longer than usual. I watched the numbers climb, 3, 4, 5, and thought about the first time I'd been up here. A performance review, maybe 8 years ago, where I'd been commended for exceptional crisis management during a supplier bankruptcy. Martin had shaken my hand personally, said the company was lucky to have me. I wondered if he remembered that conversation. The executive floor was quiet, insulated from the usual office noise by thick carpet and solid doors. The boardroom occupied the corner, floor-to-ceiling windows offering a view of the city that probably cost more in rent than most people's salaries. I'd been in this room maybe a dozen times over 20 years, usually for annual reviews or major project presentations, always as a supporting character, never the focus. Today felt different. I arrived early, chose a seat in the middle of the long mahogany table, not at the head where Martin would sit, not at the far end where junior staff usually clustered, but right in the center where I'd be impossible to ignore, and waited. The room slowly filled with the usual cast. Martin Calder entered first, moving with the careful deliberation of a man who'd survived 3 heart attacks and refused to acknowledge any of them. 74 years old, still sharp, still commanding presence just by existing in a space. He nodded in my direction without recognition. We'd spoken maybe 5 times in 20 years, always briefly, always about immediate technical crises that threatened production. Lena Brooks came next, carrying her tablet and a leather folio that looked new, probably purchased specifically for this meeting. She caught my eye and gave the smallest nod. Acknowledgement, maybe solidarity, definitely awareness that something significant was about to happen. The board members arrived in clusters, talking about golf handicaps and stock performance and their grandchildren's college acceptances. I recognized most of them from quarterly reports and company newsletters. Wealthy men in expensive suits, here to protect their investments and collect their stipends for a few hours of oversight per quarter. They'd built careers on other people's competence, made fortunes by being in the right rooms at the right times. They looked at me with vague curiosity, probably wondering why an operations engineer was present for a board meeting. Evan arrived last, exactly at 2 p.m., wearing a suit that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. Navy blue, perfectly tailored, paired with a tie that managed to be both conservative and expensive. He carried a leather portfolio and radiated the kind of confidence that comes from never having faced real consequences. He spotted me immediately and froze mid-step, one hand still on the door handle. "Drake." His voice carried confusion, not hostility, like finding an old piece of furniture in a room you'd already redecorated. "I didn't realize you'd be here." Lena requested my presence. I kept my tone neutral, professional. Something about exit documentation requiring board oversight. He glanced at Lena, who kept her expression perfectly neutral, then at his grandfather. Martin was leafing through a printed agenda, not paying attention to the exchange. "Right," Evan said slowly, recovering his composure. "Well, we can handle that quickly at the end and let you go. I'm sure you have other things to do." I said nothing. Just sat with my hands folded on the table, calm as Sunday morning, watching him try to figure out why I looked so relaxed. He took his seat near his grandfather, not at the head of the table, but close enough to signal importance, and began arranging his materials with unnecessary precision. Nervous energy disguised as preparation. Martin called the meeting to order at 2:03. Someone read minutes from the last session in a monotone that could induce sleep. Financial reports were distributed, glossy printouts showing revenue growth and market share metrics that meant very little to anyone who wasn't an accountant or a shareholder. The CFO presented quarterly earnings with the enthusiasm of someone who'd given the same presentation 40 times. I half listened, watching Evan fidget with his pen. He kept glancing at me, probably wondering why I looked so calm, why I wasn't uncomfortable being in a room full of executives who'd allowed my dismissal without question. 43 minutes in, Martin cleared his throat, a sound that immediately commanded attention. Next item. Personnel matters. Evan, you had something on this? Yes? Evan straightened, finding his boardroom voice, the one he'd probably practiced. As part of our operational modernization initiative, we've made some strategic staffing changes. Specifically, we've moved on from legacy positions that no longer align with our forward-focused direction. Legacy positions? He really couldn't help himself with that phrase. This includes the termination of Drake Torin, our former senior operations engineer. Evan glanced at me briefly, then away. Drake served the company for 20 years, and we're grateful for his contributions during that time. However, the role has become redundant given our new technological infrastructure and updated operational methodologies. One of the board members, Patterson, I thought his name was, mid-60s with silver hair and the kind of tan that came from golf courses, not construction sites, frowned. 20 years is a long tenure. Was this termination processed through the standard protocols? Evan hesitated for half a second too long. It was handled internally by executive decision. The situation required decisive action. HR signed off? Another board member, a woman whose name I didn't know, but whose face suggested she asked uncomfortable questions professionally. Lena cleared her throat softly, a sound that somehow carried across the entire room. Actually, the termination was executed without standard HR review. I flagged this as a procedural concern last week and requested this agenda item specifically to address the irregularities. The room got quieter. Even the air conditioning seemed to hush. Martin looked up from his papers. Attention fully engaged now. Explain, he said. Single word. No inflection. Maximum impact. Lena opened her tablet with precise movements. Company policy requires HR approval for any termination of employees with more than 10 years tenure. Additionally, it requires departmental review and, in certain cases involving senior operational staff, board notification prior to action. None of these protocols were followed for Mr. Torin's dismissal. Evan's jaw tightened, a muscle jumping near his ear. The decision was time-sensitive. We needed to act quickly to maintain operational momentum during a critical transition period. Momentum toward what? Patterson leaned forward slightly. What exactly was the strategic rationale for this termination? As I mentioned, technological modernization. We're implementing new systems that require different skill sets, fresh perspectives, people who understand contemporary operational methodologies rather than outdated legacy approaches. And Torin couldn't learn these new systems? The unnamed woman again. After 20 years of successfully managing your operations? It's not about ability to learn. It's about cultural fit and adaptability mindset. Legacy thinking creates institutional resistance to necessary change. We needed to clear space for transformation. I almost laughed. The corporate speak was impressive in its emptiness. Martin set down his papers with deliberate care and looked directly at me for the first time since the meeting began. His eyes were sharp, calculating, the kind of focus that had built a company from nothing. Drake, you've been with us since 2005. That correct? Yes, sir. March of 2005. And in that time, you've managed our supplier relations, production workflow, technical operations, and vendor integration. Among other responsibilities. Yes, sir. These new systems Evan mentioned, the ones that require different skill sets, do they replace your functions? I met his eyes steadily. I'm not familiar with any new systems, sir. If they exist, they weren't implemented before my termination. They weren't mentioned in any meetings I attended, and no transition planning occurred. Martin turned to Evan. Show me the implementation timeline for these new systems. Evan blinked. It's in development. We're in the planning phase. So you fired a 20-year operations engineer before replacing his function? We're streamlining the organizational structure to prepare for modernization. The role became redundant in anticipation of future systems. How is an unfilled position redundant? Patterson's voice carried genuine confusion. Who's handling supplier relations currently? My assistant Preston is coordinating those relationships. He's been doing an excellent job managing the transition. Preston Chow, the recent graduate? Lena's voice remained carefully neutral, but something in her tone suggested she was loading ammunition. He's been with the company for 5 months, is that correct? 5 months, yes, but he's sharp, adaptable, eager to learn, everything we need for the modern operational environment. He's also received 17 technical clarification requests from suppliers in the past week, Lena said, reading from her tablet with the precision of someone presenting evidence. All of them escalated from initial inquiries because the responses demonstrated fundamental misunderstanding of our product specifications, manufacturing requirements, and contractual obligations. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Evan's face flushed. There's a learning curve with any transition. Preston's getting up to speed. These are normal growing pains. Learning curves are acceptable, Martin said quietly, his voice carrying the weight of 50 years building a business. Operational failure is not. Drake, are you aware of these supplier concerns? This was the moment. The clean, clear opportunity to either de-escalate or detonate. I could soften it, make it diplomatic, help Evan save face. Or I could tell the simple, devastating truth. I chose honesty. I've received several calls from vendor partners expressing significant confusion about recent communications, I said, keeping my voice level and factual. Samuel Hargreave from Apex Manufacturing contacted me directly because the component specifications he received didn't match our actual product line. He was concerned about potential retooling costs that could run into millions of dollars. Rebecca Chen from Advanced Polymers had questions about material requirements that contradicted our standard specifications. Thomas, Michael Reeves from Integrated Systems, asked me to clarify technical requirements because the information he received seemed to be based on misunderstanding our manufacturing processes. The board members were leaning forward now, attention fully engaged. You're no longer employed here, Evan said sharply, color rising in his cheeks. Why are they calling you instead of working through proper channels? Because our contracts with many suppliers include technical continuity clauses. They specify that any major changes to product specifications or technical liaison must be approved by the designated personnel. That designated person has been me for most of these relationships, some for as long as 8 years. Absolute silence. What exactly is a technical continuity clause? The unnamed female board member asked, her voice suggesting she already suspected the answer wouldn't be good. I pulled out my phone, I'd prepared for this, had the documents readily accessible, and opened the file. Several of our supplier contracts include language requiring specific personnel to maintain technical oversight. It's a standard risk mitigation strategy in manufacturing relationships. If the designated person leaves the position or is removed from their role, the supplier has the contractual option to request renegotiation of terms or, in some cases, to withdraw from the contract entirely pending resolution. How many contracts contain this language? Martin's voice was very quiet now, the kind of quiet that preceded volcanic eruptions. 12 major suppliers. Collectively, they represent approximately 60% of our component sourcing for primary product lines. The room went silent, except for the barely audible hum of the air conditioning and the muted sounds of traffic from 8 floors below. The silence that followed my announcement felt heavy, like air pressure dropping before a storm. Martin stared at me with the kind of focus usually reserved for quarterly earnings reports. Evan looked like he'd swallowed glass. Arclight, Patterson said slowly. They're our primary competitor in the commercial electronics space. They are, I confirmed, and you've accepted a senior position with them. Senior Director of Operations Integration. Starting Monday. That's correct. Evan found his voice. This is exactly what I'm talking about. Corporate sabotage. He's taking our operational intelligence to a competitor. What operational intelligence? I asked calmly. The systems I built are documented. The processes are standardized. Anyone competent could maintain them. You just said the suppliers only want to work with you. No, I said the contracts specify working with a qualified technical liaison. I was that liaison. Someone else can be, assuming they're actually qualified. Preston is qualified. Preston thinks compression fittings and expansion joints are the same thing. One of the board members coughed to cover a laugh. Martin held up his hand again. Drake, let me ask you directly. Did you share any proprietary information with Arclight during your interview process? No, sir. Will you be sharing proprietary information if you accept their offer? I've already accepted their offer. And no, I won't be sharing anything proprietary. I don't need to. My value is in operational methodology, not corporate secrets. There's no meaningful difference, Evan snapped. There's a legal difference, Lena said quietly. Methodology isn't proprietary. specific product designs, client lists, and trade secrets are. If Mr. Torin hasn't signed a non-compete agreement, and I can confirm he hasn't, then his employment elsewhere is entirely legal. He's using relationships he built here to damage us. He's using relationships he built through competence to advance his career, Patterson said. That's called capitalism, Evan. Martin leaned forward. Drake, I'm going to ask you a question, and I want an honest answer. Is there any scenario where you'd consider staying? I'd been waiting for this. Practiced the answer in my head a dozen times. No, sir. Even if we matched Arclight's offer? It's not about money. Then what is it about? I looked at Evan, then back at Martin. Respect. I spent 20 years building systems that worked. I trained people, solved problems, kept this company running smoothly enough that nobody had to think about operations. I didn't need recognition. I didn't need praise, but I did need basic professional respect. You got respect, Evan said. I got called legacy infrastructure and fired without cause. There was cause. You weren't adapting. I wasn't given the chance to adapt. I wasn't told there were problems. I wasn't offered training or reassignment. I was just erased because it made you feel powerful. Evan stood up. You don't get to talk to me like that. Sit down, Martin said quietly. Grandfather. Sit. Down. Evan sat, face burning. Martin turned back to me. What happens to our supplier contracts now? That depends on the suppliers. Most of them will probably request meetings to discuss continuity. Some might renegotiate terms. A few might consider other options. Other options meaning Arclight or other competitors. The market's competitive, and you'll be at Arclight, ready to welcome them. I'll be at Arclight doing my job. If suppliers choose to follow, that's their business decision. Patterson spoke up. Martin, we need to address the procedural violations. This termination was improper on multiple levels. If we don't correct it, we're exposed to legal action. I'm not suing anyone, I said. But you could. And more importantly, this board should have been consulted on a decision with this level of operational impact. Martin nodded slowly. Agreed. Lena, what's the proper remedy? Lena consulted her tablet. Technically, the termination should be voided and reprocessed through proper channels. That would require Mr. Torin's reinstatement, followed by either retention or a properly authorized dismissal. That's ridiculous, Evan said. He just accepted a job with our competitor. Then we have a problem, Patterson said. Because if the termination was improper, the company is liable for constructive dismissal. Drake could sue for wrongful termination and probably win. I already said I'm not suing. But the precedent stands. If we don't follow our own policies, we're exposed every time we terminate someone. The board members started talking among themselves, voices overlapping. I sat quietly and watched Evan realize his power play had become a liability. Martin called for order. This situation is untenable. Drake, if you're truly committed to Arclight, there's nothing we can do. But I want you to understand the position this puts us in. I do understand, sir. With respect, that should have been considered before the decision was made. Fair point. Martin turned to Evan. Going forward, all terminations of senior staff require HR review and board notification. No exceptions. This sets a terrible precedent, Evan protested. The terrible precedent was already set when you fired a 20-year employee without proper authorization. Martin's voice carried steel I'd never heard before. This company was built on relationships and reliability. You just damaged both. I was trying to modernize. You were trying to prove yourself. There's a difference. The meeting continued for another 20 minutes, mostly procedural discussions about damage control and supplier outreach. I sat through it all, contributing only when directly asked, watching Evan's authority crumble in real time. Finally, Martin adjourned the meeting. Board members filed out, some nodding to me, others avoiding eye contact. Lena packed up her materials and left without a word. Evan disappeared immediately, not looking back. Martin remained seated, waiting until we were alone. You planned this? He said. It wasn't a question. I documented facts and answered questions honestly. You knew those contract clauses would cause problems. I knew they existed. Whether they cause problems depends on how the suppliers respond. He studied me for a long moment. I underestimated you. A lot of people did. My grandson most of all. I said nothing. He's arrogant, needs to learn humility. Martin stood slowly. But he's family. I can't just remove him. I'm not asking you to. What are you asking for? Nothing. I'm leaving. This is closure. Is it? Martin walked to the door, then paused. Arclight's a good company. You'll do well there. Thank you. But Drake, those suppliers who've been calling, if they follow you to ArcLight, if they break contracts to work with you instead of us, that's not illegal, but it's not nothing either. I know. Will they follow you? I met his eyes. Ask your grandson. He's the one who bet they wouldn't. Martin left, and I sat alone in the empty boardroom. My phone buzzed. A text from Samuel Hargrave. Heard the board meeting got interesting. We still on for coffee tomorrow? I replied, Absolutely. Then I stood, walked out of the building, and drove home. Janet was waiting on the front porch, reading a book in the afternoon sun. How'd it go? She asked. Exactly as planned. So you're starting at ArcLight Monday? Yes. And the suppliers? We'll see. They've got decisions to make. She closed her book and smiled. You're going to take half their vendors with you, aren't you? Only the ones who choose to follow. Drake Torin, she shook her head. 20 years of being underestimated, and now you're about to become the most expensive firing in company history. Not my fault they mistook silence for weakness. No, she agreed. It's really not. I sat beside her and watched the sun dip toward the horizon. Tomorrow I'd start making calls, following up with suppliers, building the foundation for whatever came next. But today, right now, I just wanted to sit with my wife and enjoy the quiet. My phone buzzed again. Irene from ArcLight. Congratulations on making your decision official. We're thrilled to have you. See you Monday. I sent a thumbs-up emoji and put the phone away. Somewhere across town, Evan was probably staring at spreadsheets, trying to calculate the damage. Martin was likely calling lawyers, exploring options for damage control. The board members were updating their risk assessments. And me? I was sitting on my porch, beer in hand, watching the neighborhood kids play basketball in the street. 20 years of quiet competence. 1 week of consequences. Turns out legacy infrastructure runs deeper than anyone thought.